Hi, and welcome to the Brisbane Professionals Podcast. This is a podcast brought to you by SMS Law, going through the legal secrets that will benefit you and your clients, as well as having a little bit of fun as we go. This podcast is designed to educate you on, number one, complicated legal terms that we will explain in an easy to understand manner. Two, to understand why you do things from a legal perspective in your business. And three, to help you develop a plan for the future success of your business. Our mission is to help empower small to medium-sized businesses around the world to get access to legal advice so that they can help build their communities and make the world a better place. Did you know that any business owner is on average 7 months away from losing everything? That is the average time that it takes from a successful business to fold when an aspect of their business is not set up correctly. This podcast is all about empowering you and your business with knowledge and tools to ensure that that doesn't happen to you or to your clients. Let's begin, shall we?
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Brisbane Professional Podcast. This is a podcast brought to you by SMS Law, and the idea of the podcast is to educate you regarding various legal things that happen in your life. What we wanted to talk about today is investing in property. So it's a pretty important topic, and you've probably built up your business to a point where you've got some funding that you can now start to invest in property. And it's important to look at that as part of your succession planning, estate planning, those sorts of things. So we brought on a special guest for today's show. You'll be able to see him there if you're watching us on YouTube. His name is Scott Lachmund. So Scott is the principal and licensee at Richardson and WrenchCaboolture. He's at the forefront of sales in this area as well as property management. And he was going to bring a pretty important insight into investing in property in the Moreton Bay region and various other things you can use if you're investing in property in other regions as well. We've known Scott for quite some time and we appreciate him coming on to the show. Scott, do you want to say hello to everyone and introduce yourself a little bit?
Good morning, listeners, viewers. This is going around the world with Jeremy and Craig's audience these days. So yeah, pleasure to be on the show, mate. And yeah, tell me when to be quiet because I can talk about real estate and investing all day, mate. So
Absolutely.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And that's the beautiful thing about bringing on guests. They can do the talking and we don't have to do it. So in terms of, so you're the principal and licensee at Richardson WrenchCaboolture. That's a family business. I'll let you say how long it's been around for with your mum and your dad. But just give background into your role as well and how you actually started at Richardson Wrench.
Yeah, definitely. Family business. Mum, dad, my sister and I. 1st of April 1994. So we're in our 28th year of business locally. Very proud history of business, and basically over that 28 years we've sold over $1 billion worth of property. We've grown an organic rent roll portfolio from 0 to over 1,000 properties we manage within the Moreton Bay region. Have a team of 22 staff members across both sections of the business. And I guess the other thing, we're very proud and we like to share that we've supported our community over that 28 years and we've donated in excess of $1 million back into our community, which we're pretty proud of as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So you obviously seen a lot of change over that time.
Most definitely. Yeah, most definitely, mate. When we started Morayfield Road, where our location is, it was still a 2-lane road with a dirt access road, and people thought we were crazy opening a business and buying a premises on Morayfield Road 28 years ago. And as we know today, you can't buy commercial space on Morayfield Road, and I guess we weren't the fools on the 1st of April in 1994. I think we've proven that the growth has just been great, Craig, and it's come in patches. I talk to people about a roller coaster of real estate, and I'll use my hands because I'm not Italian, but I like to speak with my hands. There's always a roller coaster in real estate, and I think we've seen patches of growth maybe in those early 90s, then sort of the mid 2000s up to late 2000s, and then refreshing in the last couple of years. We're seeing that population migration from down south, and our area continues to grow and prosper, and I guess that now gives us a platform of an exciting sort of future ahead of us for the Moreton Bay region, with that not only population growth but also growth in industry and jobs and employment and infrastructure. It all is leading to future growth, which is exciting as well, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Scott, the last couple of years, we've obviously seen some changes. Hopefully we're at the tail end of the pandemic, or at least it feels that way. But at the beginning of it, back in 2020, there were some things that happened that probably meant that a lot of people weren't doing a lot of property investing. There was a lot of uncertainty around. That rebounded from what I'm seeing pretty dramatically. But what other changes have you seen over the last, say, 2.5 years in relation to the pandemic, and what do you see happening in the future?
Yeah, for me, mate, I think locally, Moreton Bay region, it was sort of mid-March was the date stamp when we got hit with COVID and restrictions, and there was an immediate sort of pause. People sat on their hands. Investors, sellers, buyers alike. We sort of sat on our hands, to be fair, through that month of March and April. But then I think real estate in general, we then continued on. Everyone used the cliche business as usual. It certainly wasn't business as usual. Internally, we pivoted with the way we were interacting with clients and dealing with business. We were restricted with viewings of properties that then lent back onto video walkthroughs or FaceTime calls with clients. Those virtual sort of inspections. But then, to be fair, real estate sort of continued on in our area, that the fundamentals of real estate, that people still needed to relocate or move, whether it was for employment or whether it was for health or other reasons. That traditional life cycle of real estate continued, of people still needing to sell their home, and just as equal, there was still that buyer demand, that although we were in restricted COVID times with our movements, we started to see people from interstate, Sydney, Melbourne, looking at what their futures held for them, and if we were going to live through a restrictive lifestyle, let's call it. I guess people were starting to look at their future options of, if I'm going to work from home, I'm not travelling into the city anymore. There was sort of scenarios of that made people think of buying that family home or that dream home they aspired to, and that was going to become the new normal, that we'd work from home, so why not be in a good environment? So there was a bit of buyer activity there. Thankfully, our Moreton Bay region, we've always been very affordable compared to other states and areas. And I think just that affordability and the availability of stock that we had at the time, talking March 2020, there was still a lot of stock available. So we continued to transact as normal as possible through that stage. And I think then that just gave us that confidence that as the pandemic continued, unfortunately, we kept on attracting that buyer interest, which then helped with our demand of getting sellers onto the market, and maybe stopped those hesitations of people wondering what the future was. We tried to paint the picture as normal as possible, and I think that was sort of that was beneficial for our industry locally. I try to talk about all real estates. The Moreton Bay region's a very big slice of pie, and there's enough for everyone to eat. And I think all agents, continued on and got on with business through those first sort of 6 to 12 months of the pandemic. I think then as Queensland was surviving so well through our restrictions and the measures that Queenslanders took through COVID, we then again became more and more attractive for the likes of Melbourne or Sydney that were going through some horrific times. They wanted to escape to the Sunshine State, and I think that all snowballed again in line with the affordability, and also rewind 18 months ago, 12 months ago, money was still very cheap. I think just real estate continued for our general area, which was very positive. Where to from there? Fast forward, thankfully we came out of there, and even in this last 6-month segment, I'd probably like to talk about pretty much this calendar year from January to now. We're in May. This calendar year so far, that all the forces are aligning. The gates came down on the border. That interstate migration continued, if not even more so. People were maybe had rejuggled their employment or their lifestyles through the COVID period to now come out on this other side with different aspirations, as I said, of where they're living and where they can work remotely from. That all led to a real good snowball of high activity, and activity that we're still seeing today in the month of May. That, thankfully, the first 4 months of this year have been pretty prosperous, mate, and now we sort of get into that subject and that conversation of where to from here. There's announcements with lending changes and interest rates rising, and the cost of living, and the inflation. I think we're still very fortunate, Craig, that again our region, southeast Queensland, Brisbane, Moreton Bay region, we've still got a real promising future, mate, and I think people are. It's funny, I've known this for 30 years and 28 years in business, but it's like people are rediscovering Moreton Bay region, or Caboolture to be exact. People are rediscovering that this is the place to go. We're a short distance to Brisbane, we're a short distance to the coast, hinterland, coast on the east, and the employment opportunities of all that growth and infrastructure still happening in southeast Queensland. We're on the radar, true and proper, and people are open homes are getting good numbers. Properties, we're getting 20 to 30 buyers per property, and we're still seeing growth in the market for sellers, and we're seeing some at sometimes over the last few weeks I've sort of scratched my head on a couple of prices that we have achieved for some properties, because 12 months ago that price indication just was not there. So we may have waited a long time for this continued growth and activity, but it's certainly on our doorstep now, mate. And I see that continuing. I think people are wise enough that if they're comfortable in their finances, and you mentioned at the start of the show, if they're in business and their business has survived through the pandemic and they've come out this other end, hopefully there's still those opportunities to invest in property at a reasonable rate with reasonable returns. And I don't see that changing too much. I think people are pretty savvy with their finances to survive through these interest rate increases or the cost of living at the moment.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And obviously we've got the election too here and coming up in a couple of weeks, which sometimes people sort of wait till after that, but I don't see that sort of happening or having much bearing either. Obviously interest rates went up last week, but not not a huge jump, and it may continue, but we've had it pretty good for the last 12 years. So
yeah, traditionally in real estate, the next fortnight might be quiet until election day, but I haven't got the stats of pre-poll. It's only been open for a day, but if the federal government does not change and we continue with the same federal government, rest assured, mate, the Monday after the election, the phones will ring hot, because I think people will just get on with business and get on with some certainty of the next chapter.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. So, we're talking about property investment. Now, this is not financial advice or legal advice or anything like that. When we're talking about investments, everyone should diversify where they can. Obviously, you're an expert in real property and units, houses, etc. So that's what we're talking about today. So, why is an investment in that sort of property a good choice from your point of view at the moment?
Well, I'm not real educated, but look at Netflix and Bitcoin last night, and and I think in the share market there's some volatility at the moment, and I'm thankful that my parents always taught me about bricks and mortar, because it's something I can touch and feel and see and manage, and instead of watching the spreadsheet go like this, and then
And
just because someone's made a bad decision.
What's the sort of capital growth example that you've seen? You might have sold someone a house previously, and then you've sold it again recently, and the sort of the growth that they would have established through that time.
Yeah, literally, I'm quoting general residential, medium house, literally 100 to 150 grand in the last 12 months. I do have a couple of examples where people bought just before this next little trigger of a boom. Let's say they bought February 2021, almost to the dollar. I'm appraising that property and selling it for 100 grand more 12 months later, and trying to make it just over that 12-month trigger, so we're not running into penalties of stamp duty or anything like that. But I have had a couple of people where they got into the investment market and thought, bugger it, let's flip it while the going is good, and they've made a tidy little profit after their expenses, and good luck to them. I'm more of a longer term holder of investments, so I like to sort of ride out the investment, and even just our personal properties in our portfolio, I think across five residential houses, I've picked up about 700 grand equity across the 5 in the last 12 months. So I don't see where you could do that in any other sort of holding. And talking to some commercial colleagues with commercial properties, they're also seeing some good results and growth in the commercial space of buying and selling properties. Maybe not so much the leasing demand, but definitely the buying and selling of commercial has also improved in a similar fashion.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you put that 100,000 in perspective, the median house price is what, 350, 400 mostly that you're dealing with, or a little bit more?
Would have been the latest that after the first quarter of this year, the new medium house price in Caboolture is 444, so 450 grand, whereas quite distinctly that would have been 350 12 months ago.
Yeah, absolutely. So with all this...
Sorry, I was just going to say the smaller acreage properties, like the lifestyle properties, they've sort of more that 150 almost, even up to 200 grand equity over the last 12 months.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a demand. There's lots of people sort of struggling to buy because there's so many others, interstate, etc. But once they secure that property, and this is from a property investment point of view, you mentioned that you've grown your rent roll from 0 to over 1,000. So what have you seen in terms of rental demand and the yield as the property management side of the business over the last 12 months?
So again, try to give you a bit of a historical record to where we sit today. It wouldn't be uncommon, let's call it pre-pandemic, pre-COVID. 2020, we would have seen you could buy an investment and have a gross return of 5.7 to 6% gross return on a residential property, which was pretty favourable. As I say, money was cheap, and you're coming out with a pretty good net yield there, and to the point that some properties were positive in their cash flow or asset. Whereas today, investing today, we just haven't quite played catch up with the rent return. So the price of property has grown, let's say 100 grand in the last 12 months, but the rent, we haven't been able to renew rents or establish new rents. We're still catching up that game of over the last 12 months. So someone may have been on a fixed term lease and paying $350 a week rent for a 4-bedroom home. When their lease renewal is due now, it's sort of more that 450 to 500 per week rent. So it's a bit of catch-up game on the tenancy side of things, and that's causing pain, that's a different subject. That's causing pain for renters. But on the owner side of things, if I give you that example today, let's say we sell a house for $500,000, the rent may only be sort of $400 a week. So we're seeing more that lucky if you're getting 5.2% gross return. So we've dropped a bit in those returns, but the investor has picked up in capital growth. So it's a real seesaw made of which way you look at your economics and what works for you. Some people like to have a negative gearing aspect in their investment holdings, and some people may enjoy the benefit of a property producing a positive return. So that's a bit of a seesaw, but I think over the next 6 months that will sort of catch up, and the rents are certainly increasing each day, and we should be able to get back to that sort of higher fives, close to 6% return in the next 12 months.
Yeah, that's a really important point. I hadn't turned my mind to that there is a lag, isn't there? Because people have locked into lease agreements, and then the property's increased in value, so the rent will go up, but it may take a little bit longer. So you've got your sister who's more to do with the property management side of things, but in terms of an overall strategy, with so much demand for property, how do you select a tenant? What sort of things do you look at when you're doing it? It's an important
it's
part.
tough, mate. As I say, there's a pain point. Out of our 1,000, I think there's 3 available at the moment. Last week, 50 odd applications for one property. I think the police came to check what was happening in the neighbourhood, because there was cars all lined up in the cul-de-sac and people standing everywhere, and obviously one of the neighbours freaked out, and the police came along and said, what's going on? I said, sorry mate, just an open home for a rental, and he ended up coordinating traffic and helping people get out of the T section from the open home. So I shouldn't scoff, but it's just funny. But yeah, that pain point, 50 applications for one property. How do you pick who the best tenant is out of 50 applications? We can't contract out of the Act, which means if a tenant offers us, rent in advance, or offers to pay $20 more than what we're marketing the property for, our business practice is that's contracting out of the Act, so we don't accept those propositions. However, if I look at 50 applications, I guess what we're looking for in this economic climate is, if the rents are increasing, we always had a guide of a third. When we have a tenant selection criteria, we look at a third of their income to cover the rent. So pretty much a third. So a third for rent, a third for bills and whatever, and then a third for living expenses. So that's becoming difficult, because if we talk about a new average rent is going to be, say, $450 a week, not many families are earning $1,200, $1,300 a week as an individual to balance that measurement of a third. So I guess we're looking at combined incomes. I guess we're looking at stability in their employment. Also, referencing, which happens organically in real estate. We like to make sure that they left their last rental property in good stead. But it's a tough one, mate. I think we lay them all out, and the girls, we still check every 50 applications. We still do all the checks. We still give everyone the same process to follow. But then approaching the owner, it sort of comes down to maybe a top 10 out of those 50. Explain the process, or explain each individual tenant to the owner, and again, whether sort of just what resonates with them, of who they think might be ideal for the property, with a bit of our guidance. But the income and the stability of employment, or if they are on benefits of some sort, we just want to make sure those benefits are locked in and are going to change based on health or caring or whatever that scenario and benefits may be. So we're probably more just looking at stability of that income, that that they can survive and budget through these higher rents in the longer term, not just a 6-month wonder and we get into an arrears situation and it all goes downhill, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of buying the investment property in the first place, now, as you've said, you've based in Caboolture, which is in Moreton Bay Council area here in southeast Queensland, so between Brisbane and the Sunshine Coast, for people that may not know where that is. So it's a growth area. Is it one of the largest councils, I think, in terms of area?
Yeah, in the top three, in the top 3 councils for Australia of per population.
And so there's new developments happening. Things are coming along nicely. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but it is a gradual process, and we've got the Olympics and all that's happening in 2032 as well. In whilst it's Brisbane, it's still spread out, and there's going to be things throughout southeast Queensland. So there'll be plenty of opportunities there. So when you're looking for an investment property, what are the sorts of things that you've got to tick the box on? Location, what the type is, age, those sorts of things from your point of view.
The fundamentals haven't changed too much, Craig. If there was a wish list, it would be close to transport, close to schools. I think I'd be looking at the age of the dwelling. The last thing you want buying an investment property is having ongoing maintenance expenses for an older property. So I'd say the age and the quality of the home. Close to schools, close to transport, shops. Look for maybe those 1%ers that you could attract a little bit higher rent. And when I say that, that might be might be a double garage rather than a single garage. It might be a rear patio. It might be security screens. A garden shed, extra storage. There's all little things that I would look for in a property that could attract that extra $10, $20 per week on top of the average. And I guess also I would also consider opportunity for capital growth. Is there improvements that I can make to the property, painting, flooring, little expenses in the scheme of things that could then help towards the capital growth moving forward.
Yeah. I guess now home office and those sorts of things is probably more sought after as well. Given that people are working from home more, they want a decent space to do that from, and not sort of tucked away in the kitchen or on the dining table. So that would be one. And
just on that point, it's another 1%, mate. Put in a couple of extra PowerPoints, put in a couple extra IT points, and a couple of those sort of extras in a property attracts maybe that style of tenant that is working from home. So they're all little things that could make the rental property more attractive to get that higher return.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess there could be scope for some major changes that might make it dual occupancy, or building some form of structure out in the backyard with all the little homes that are around now as well. That could be.
Yeah, it's something to be weary of or cautious of. The model of a house and then like a granny flat in the backyard to try to get a dual income. Just got to be careful with local zoning and council doing a bit of a backflip on those dual locks in the last 12 months, which hasn't been helpful.
Yeah, right.
A few little changes with zoning and applications. Just I don't know. My wording's not real accurate, mate. But you got to make an investment property pretty much bulletproof or tenant proof, and if you can make it low maintenance, little to do, and what's the worst that can happen? That's what we have insurances for. But just try to make the property very tenantable and clean and tidy, and that's where you'll sort of do well.
Yeah, I think due diligence before you put a contract on a property is more important now than it ever has been, because if you go to a seller with conditions like 21 days for due diligence, for instance, and someone else comes along with, cash unconditional, which one they're going to accept. So you need to do some due diligence as much as you can. Obviously, you may not be able to, start taking soil tests, for instance, but there are some things you can be doing, checking out the property, so you're coming into it with the knowledge that what you're going to pay for it is about right, and what the rental yield's going to be, and those sorts of things. So I think it's pretty important to do that as early as you can, and spend some time on it.
No, definitely.
Okay, so what else do you see, or what else did you want to share in relation to property investment before we finish up, Scott? So appreciate you coming on as always, but what's a last little snippet that our listeners can take away and say, oh yes, that came from Scott Lachmund?
You probably won't hear this from a real estate agent, but just be careful of what price or what maximum you're prepared to spend on a property. The reason I say that is we're in a growing area. I've talked about the population migration. I've talked about the infrastructure that's on the books and it's still happening, federal, state, local. There's a lot of attention on our region at the moment, and that's all creating a very prosperous vibe, for the foreseeable future. The problem is with all that population and activity, there's a lot of owner-occupiers in the current market. And the owner-occupiers are always going to pay what I call the love price for a property. It's what they've always wanted. It's the location they've wanted, blah, 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 blah. They've sold and settled elsewhere, and they've got the money in their pocket to make a decision today of where they're going to live for their future. It's a lot more of an emotional decision for an owner-occupier to buy a property. If I had two buyers, one an investor, one an owner-occupier, the investor is listening to this, or they've had other advice, and they're going to go in. Let's say the house is for sale for $450,000. The investor is going to try to buy the property for $450,000 because it equals X, Y, Z, and that's what my financial planner, or that's the advice I've been given, and I'm going to buy this property today for $450,000. What happens is when you've got 30 people coming through a home and there's 15 owners and 15 investors, the owners have a fear of missing out, FOMO, and the homeowners or the owner-occupiers are going to offer 20, 30, 40, and I saw it the other day, an owner-occupier offered $500,000 on a $450,000 marketed property. So if the investor was a little bit anxious and said, well, I need to buy an investment today and I really need to do this, if that investor pays the $500,000, effectively they've paid $50,000 too much, and it's going to upset the apple cart of their return and their strategy and their growth and everything else. I opened that statement with, you won't hear this from a real estate agent at the moment, but I actually wouldn't buy an investment property today. I'd actually just wait and see how this little curve unfolds over the next quarter of maybe, not only elections, but June, July, see what happens with the economy, and just be paused and ready and do your due diligence, and then maybe see about making a decision in the property market in the next quarter. I wouldn't be rushing out, getting caught up in that FOMO of owner-occupiers and paying too much for a property.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. I mean, it's the right strategy, property investment, but if it's the wrong time, then it's the wrong strategy. So, you've got to definitely think about those sorts of things. So, I appreciate that, Scott. That's, as you said, may not come from any other real estate agent, but important for our listeners.
It's just transparency, mate. We all have different trades, but, I wouldn't be sitting here a reputable, integral agent after 28 years if I did the wrong thing by people. And as much as you say we don't give legal or financial advice, it just feels it's just what we do. I'd rather give people clear information to make an educated decision, rather than knock on my door 12 months later and say, wow, I paid $50,000 too much for that house. Why didn't you tell me? Whereas the owner-occupier doesn't care because they're going to live there for the next 10, 15 years and they're going to enjoy growth and they don't care if they pay too much today because it's what they want. It's their love price.
No.
So I'd always rather be transparent and be careful what you're acquiring at the moment and for how much.
No, excellent advice. And that's why we invited you on, and you pleasantly accepted it. And we appreciate you coming on and sharing with our listeners and viewers, some real insight into property investing, specifically in Moreton Bay, I guess, but it's the same advice I think can be used whether you're in Moreton Bay or in Timbuktu. I guess they're the same things. So we really appreciate you coming on. For any of our listeners and viewers, so that was Scott Lachmund from Richardson WrenchCaboolture. We'll put his details in the notes. And if you want to continue following the podcast, please remember to rate and review it. No doubt this one's definitely a 5-starer with Scott here. So rate and review 5-star, hopefully. Put any comments in there that you like. We do try to get on guests as much as possible as well, and they're always shows that people enjoy. I'm not sure if I should take that to heart or not, but they do tend to enjoy the guest spots more often. So like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, search for us on LinkedIn. That's Craig, Mason and Jeremy, the other founder of the law firm, and also obviously Scott as well. He's pretty, what's the word for it, consistent on social media and shares a lot of important things on there that I'd definitely encourage you to jump on the Richardson Wrench Facebook page and follow Scott, because you do get some insight along the times. So Scott, that's it. We're done. Thank you.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you for joining us.
Take care.